Welcome to Simply English, an educational channel.
Welcome to our deep dive into improving English reading skills.
Yeah.
We're going to be looking at advice from Sarah and John, who share their insights on a podcast. And what's really cool is that John actually went from feeling intimidated by English texts to being like a super confident English speaker, just from reading.
Oh, wow. It's amazing how reading can unlock so many other language skills, right? It's not just about decoding words on a page.
Exactly. So John started out feeling overwhelmed, like a lot of us do when we first start reading in English.
I can totally relate to that feeling.
It's like trying to decipher some ancient scroll.
Right.
But John's strategy was genius.
Mm-hmm.
He started with super simple stuff like children's books, graded readers, those books specifically for English language learners.
Makes sense. You got to build a solid foundation before you can tackle those massive novels and complex articles.
Right. It's like building a house. You don't start with the roof.
Exactly. Start with something achievable. Then you build confidence as you go.
And what I love is that John didn't just stay in the children's section forever. He gradually increased the difficulty, like moving from children's books to short stories to young adult novels.
It's like leveling up in a video game. As he progressed, he encountered new words, but he already had the context to figure them out.
Oh, that's so smart. He wasn't just memorizing words in isolation.
Right. He was learning how they functioned within a sentence, within a whole story.
And speaking of new vocabulary, John had a system for that too. He was old school. He loved his vocabulary notebooks.
I remember those. I used to have stacks of them.
But he also embraced technology, using dictionaries and apps to quickly look up definitions.
It's like having a whole toolbox at your disposal, right? You've got your traditional methods, and then you have these awesome tech tools that can really speed things up.
So true. Now let's talk about tackling those longer articles and reports. John wasn't just reading them line by line, word by word. He had some secret weapons up his sleeve.
Skimming and scanning, it's about reading with a purpose.
Totally. Skimming to get the overall gist, like looking at a map before you start a road trip, and scanning for specific details, like when you're trying to find a particular fact or piece of information.
Imagine you're doing research for a project. You've got a mountain of articles and a limited amount of time. Skimming helps you quickly decide which articles are actually relevant to your topic.
Then scanning lets you zero in on the specific info you need. It's such a time saver.
A game changer for sure. But it wasn't all about speed reading for John. He also practiced something called intensive reading, where he'd really dig deep into a short, challenging passage.
That's like savoring a gourmet meal versus grabbing a quick snack, right?
Exactly. Intensive reading is about slowing down, engaging with the text on a deeper level, analyzing the grammar structures, appreciating the nuances in the vocabulary.
It's like studying a textbook versus reading a novel for pleasure. Both have their place in the learning process.
Absolutely. And to balance out that deep dive approach, John also made sure to do plenty of extensive reading. That's where you just enjoy longer texts like novels or blogs without getting hung up on every single word.
Oh, I've definitely been guilty of that. Getting stuck on a word and losing the flow of the story.
It happens to the best of us, but with practice, it happens less and less. It's like learning to ride a bike. At first, you're wobbling and stopping all the time. But the more you do it, the smoother the ride becomes.
Okay, so we've talked about approaches to reading, but let's dive into vocabulary specifically. John admitted that at first he'd get totally tripped up by unfamiliar words, looking up every single one.
Oh, yeah. It's so tempting to reach for the dictionary every time you see a new word. But think about how native speakers learn vocabulary. They don't stop to look up every word they hear.
They learn by context.
Precisely. And John realized that he could often guess the meaning of a word just by paying attention to the surrounding words and sentences.
It's like being a detective using clues to solve a mystery.
It's more than just a word puzzle, though. Guessing meaning from context helps you develop a deeper understanding of how words function in a sentence, how they relate to each other.
It's like building this mental map of the language, right?
Exactly. And if John couldn't figure out a word from context, he'd use flashcards or apps like Anki or Quizlet to help him remember it.
I've always been a fan of flashcards myself. I love the feeling of physically flipping through them and testing myself.
But the real key to vocabulary acquisition is active use. It's not enough to just memorize words. You have to actually use them in your speaking and writing.
Think of it like learning to play an instrument. You could read all the music theory books in the world, but until you pick up the instrument and start playing, you won't truly master it.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Okay, so we've talked approaches, vocabulary. Now let's talk reading speed and comprehension. I know a lot of people want to know how to read faster without sacrificing understanding.
John had some great tips for that.
He did.
One of his favorites was using a visual guide, like a finger or a pen, to follow along as he reads. Sounds simple, but it can really make a difference.
Just by using your finger to track the words, you can actually read faster and comprehend better.
Think about it. Our eyes tend to jump around when we read, especially if we're tired or the text is challenging. Using a visual guide helps you maintain focus, prevents backtracking, and sets a consistent pace.
Like having a little coach for your eyes,
Yeah,
keeping them on track.
exactly. And for those who enjoy a challenge, John also recommended timed reading exercises. I know it sounds a bit daunting, but setting a timer can actually be a great way to improve focus and track your progress.
If you know you're on the clock, you're less likely to let your mind wander.
Mm.
And then you can see how your speed and comprehension improve over time.
It can be quite motivating. And another technique John swore by was writing aloud. Now, I know that might sound a bit silly, but hear me out. Reading aloud forces you to slow down and pay attention to each word.
You know what? I actually do that sometimes when I'm struggling with a particularly complex passage.
It helps with pronunciation rhythm and even understanding. Think of it like this. When you read silently, you're primarily using your visual processing. But when you read aloud, you're engaging your auditory processing as well.
You're hearing the words, feeling the rhythm of the language, connecting with the text on a whole new level.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm sold.
Yeah.
Reading aloud is officially added to my list of reading strategies.
Now let's shift gears and talk about choosing the right reading material. After all, you wouldn't expect a beginner to jump straight into a dense academic journal article, right?
It'd be like trying to run a marathon with no training.
John emphasized finding that sweet spot, materials that challenge you without feeling completely overwhelming.
So how do you know what that sweet spot is? Especially if you're just starting out.
Start with materials that feel comfortable and enjoyable. Children's books, graded readers, simple articles. As you get more confident, you can gradually increase the difficulty. Move on to short stories, young adult novels, even news websites designed for English language learners.
And eventually the whole world of English literature will be open to you.
Precisely. But I have to ask, what about ebooks versus physical books? Is one better for language learning than the other?
That's a great question.
Honestly, I think it comes down to personal preference. Both formats have their advantages. Ebooks are incredibly convenient. You can carry a whole library in your pocket.
True. And a lot of e-readers have built-in dictionaries, which can be super helpful for language learners. You could even adjust the font size.
Absolutely. But there's something special about holding a physical book in your hands. The feel of the paper, the smell of the ink.
I love that feeling. And let's not forget about the benefits of disconnecting from screens. Sometimes it's nice to just take a break from the digital world and immerse yourself in a good old-fashioned book.
So it sounds like the best advice is to choose the format that you enjoy the most and that makes you want to read.
At the end of the day, the most important thing is to read regularly. Make it a habit, just like brushing your teeth or taking a walk.
John shared how he made reading a regular part of his routine. He set a daily goal, even if it was just for 15 or 20 minutes. And he created a cozy reading environment for himself.
Like a little sanctuary where he could escape into the world of books.
It's amazing how such small changes can make a big difference.
And once you start experiencing the joy and benefits of regular reading, you'll be amazed at how easily it becomes a part of your life.
Speaking of making reading more enjoyable, have you ever considered joining a book club?
Oh yeah. Book clubs are fantastic. They offer a sense of community accountability and a chance to discuss what you're reading with other people.
It's a great way to deepen your understanding and get different perspectives on the material. I was in a book club once where we had a completely different interpretation of the ending. It sparked a lively debate that lasted for weeks.
That's the beauty of literature. It invites multiple interpretations. And even if you're not in a book club, John emphasized the importance of summarizing and discussing what you read, whether you're talking to a friend writing a blog post or even just thinking it through in your head.
Putting your thoughts into words helps you solidify your understanding.
It forces you to engage with the material on a deeper level.
Absolutely. And it helps you identify the key takeaways and connect the dots between different ideas. So we've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive, from starting small to tackling complex texts. From vocabulary strategies to the importance of finding joy in the reading process, John has given us a wealth of insights to improve our English reading skills.
But before we move on to Sarah's tips, let's take a moment to reflect on what we've learned so far. What stood out to you the most from John's journey?
I think what impressed me the most was his willingness to experiment and find what worked best for him. He didn't just follow a prescribed set of rules. He tried different techniques, adapted them to his own learning style, and created a reading routine that fit his lifestyle.
That's such an important takeaway. There's no one-size-fits-all approach to reading. It's about finding what works for you and making it a part of your life in a way that feels sustainable and enjoyable. But that brings us to a key question for you, dear listener. What one thing from John's journey are you going to try today? Pick one tiny thing and see how it impacts your reading. We'll be back with part 2 of this deep dive, where we'll explore Sarah's top tips for supercharging your English reading skills. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to our deep dive on boosting your English reading skills. John gave us so many great strategies in the last part.
It's amazing how he went from feeling totally intimidated to being a confident English reader. And now we're going to hear from Sarah. She's got some amazing tips for turning reading into like a powerful habit.
One that sticks.
Okay, so Sarah's first tip is all about setting achievable goals. Whether it's finishing a chapter reading for a certain amount of time or even just getting through a certain number of pages, having that target in mind can really help you stay motivated.
It's like having a roadmap. It gives you a sense of direction and helps you track your progress.
Exactly. And her second tip goes hand in hand with what John said about guessing, meaning from context. Sarah reminds us that we don't need to get hung up on every single unfamiliar word.
Sometimes we get so focused on understanding every single word that we miss the bigger picture.
It's like getting lost in the trees and forgetting about the forest.
Precisely.
And speaking of absorbing information, Sarah's third tip emphasizes summarizing what you read.
It doesn't have to be anything fancy. Just jot down a few notes or mentally recap the main points. Putting those thoughts into your own words can really help with comprehension.
I love that. It's like creating your own mental map of the information.
Exactly. It helps you organize the information and make it more memorable. And Sarah's fourth tip is all about pushing yourself beyond your comfort zone.
Once you're feeling good at a certain level, don't be afraid to challenge yourself a bit further.
It's like weightlifting. You start with lighter weights and gradually increase the load as you get stronger.
You got to keep those reading muscles working.
Exactly. And finally, Sarah's fifth tip is all about establishing a consistent reading routine.
This is so important. Make reading a regular part of your day, even if it's just for a few minutes.
It's like anything else we do consistently, like exercising or eating healthy. It becomes a natural part of our lives.
And the more you read, the more you'll notice the benefits. Not just in terms of language skills, but also in terms of knowledge perspective and even relaxation.
Sarah and John have given us so much to think about, but I think what really stands out to me is how much their journeys emphasize that this is about so much more than just becoming a good reader.
It really is. It's about the transformation that takes place along the way.
Remember how John mentioned that reading actually made him a better English speaker overall?
It's a perfect example of how interconnected all the language skills truly are. Expanding your vocabulary, improving your grammar, immersing yourself in the rhythm of the language. It all works together.
It's like a ripple effect spreading outward from the pages of a book.
And it extends beyond just the technical aspects of language, too.
Reading opens doors to new worlds, introduces you to different perspectives, expands your understanding of different cultures.
It's like stepping into someone else's shoes for a while.
And as you become a more adept reader, that journey becomes even richer and more rewarding. What really resonated with me from Sarah's tips was the emphasis on finding joy in the process.
It shouldn't feel like a chore. It should be something you look forward to, something that nourishes your mind and spirit. But even though we've gotten all this great advice from John and Sarah, their specific tips might not work for everyone.
And that's okay. The key is to be open to experimentation.
Try different techniques. Find what works best for you.
And don't be afraid to adapt and adjust along the way.
What works for one person might not work for another. But before we move on, let's take a moment to connect all of this back to you. What one thing from Sarah's advice are you going to try today?
What small change can you make to boost your reading habits?
We've been on quite the journey, haven't we? Exploring all these amazing tips and strategies for improving English reading skills. From John's inspiring story to Sarah's practical advice.
It's been a real deep dive. And what's great is that we've gone beyond just the surface level. We've really explored why these techniques work and the deeper impact that reading can have on your overall language skills.
And even on your life, right? Like, it's not just about becoming a faster reader or understanding more complex texts. It's about the transformation that happens along the way.
Remember how John talked about reading actually making him a better English speaker?
It's amazing how it all connects. Expanding your vocabulary, improving your grammar, immersing yourself in the rhythm of the language. It's like all these different pieces working together to create this beautiful tapestry of fluency.
It's like learning to dance. At first, you're focused on the individual steps, But as you practice more and more, you start to feel the music move more fluidly and express yourself with more confidence.
Exactly. And that brings me to another key takeaway, the importance of finding the right level of challenge.
That sweet spot.
Yes, it's about pushing yourself just enough to keep growing without getting discouraged. It's like finding that perfect weight to lift at the gym. You want to challenge yourself, but you don't want to overdo it.
And remember, it's okay to start with simpler materials and gradually work your way up. There's no shame in starting small.
Like climbing a mountain. You don't start at the summit, you start at the base and enjoy the journey as you go.
And speaking of journeys, one of the most amazing things about reading is the way it transports you to different worlds and expands your horizons.
It's like having a passport to infinite destinations, all within the pages of a book.
You can explore different cultures, time periods, perspectives. It's incredible.
It's not just about escapism either.
Right.
Right. Reading can also challenge our assumptions, introduce us to new ideas, help us make sense of the world around us.
It's like holding up a mirror to ourselves. Sometimes we see things we like, sometimes we see things we want to change. But through that process of reflection, we grow and evolve.
It's a powerful stuff. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I think the most important question to ask is, what are you going to do differently as a result of what we've discussed?
We've covered so many strategies and techniques, from setting realistic goals to embracing different reading approaches, from actively building your vocabulary to finding joy in the process.
So what resonated with you the most? What one small change can you make today to enhance your English reading skills? Will you carve out some time for reading before bed? Will you try skimming and scanning an article instead of reading every single word? Will you challenge yourself to look up one new word each day and use it in a conversation?
Every journey starts with a single step, and even the smallest actions can lead to incredible results over time.
So, dear listener, we encourage you to take what you've learned from this deep dive and make it your own. Experiment, explore, find what works best for you, and most importantly, enjoy the journey.
Happy reading, everyone, and until next time, keep those pages turning.
Thanks for watching this video from Simply English, an educational channel for all ages and all stages. If you're new to this channel and enjoyed this video, please subscribe and press the like button. If you have any suggestions, please mention them in the comments section. Take care, and goodbye.